for you. And thanks to all of you for the great job you do reporting on Vermont. I'm honored to be here for lunch. And as usual, they make me speak when the food comes. But if you want to lose weight fast, be a governor. Listen, it's a beautiful day, and I've never seen so many smart people sitting inside on a beautiful day in Vermont. But I just want to say a few words to you about, first of all, how much I appreciate the job you're doing, and then secondly, tell you why I think you should appreciate where you're doing it here in Vermont, and where we are in this time of history, and why the journey that we're on is so unusual. But I first want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work you did with us during Irene. It was a partnership of Vermont at its best, and the job that you did, ensuring, first of all, that folks got the information they needed to try and get them out of harm's way if they weren't already in harm's way, was a good example of getting public information they must have as a city. And it was under very tough circumstances where we lost all the tools and technology that we often use to get the message out. So thank you for your persistence. You also were tremendously helpful in helping us get the message out about helping to raise money and get goods to people that needed clothing and other things that happened during our meeting. So thank you for your continued efforts there. We still have a long way to go. There's a lot of people hurt. There are a lot of people who feel like we've forgotten. I am going to deliver on the promise with you of rebuilding Vermont better than the way Irene found us. We all know we have more work to do, but thanks for your role for helping us to get the money to folks that desperately need it. And finally, the follow-up that you've been doing on the stories of pain, helping to not leave people out there feeling like they got left behind, is tremendously important to the psychological well-being of this state and to the recovery. That's going to be a long process. I know that we have, folks here who saw everything get washed away, printing presses at the Times-Argus that have been with us for generations, that will never be returned in most cases to that location. And the stories go on and on. So we all felt it. But I really am grateful to the Vermont Press Corps for the job that you've been doing with us vis-a-vis Irene. Maria said a few words about transparency. We did pass the public records law, as you know. I felt very strongly that we had to prove that Vermont can have the most transparent government. I can't deny that Irene distracted us from getting more work done that we wish to get done this session. It's hard to have a more transparent government in Vermont. There's more work to do. My recommendation was going into the session, and right before Irene, I was talking to some of you about it, that we pick an area of transparency, and I particularly thought the judicial branch of government and law enforcement would be the place to go, and really focus on how we can continue to make real progress. Irene happened. We had a lot of distractions, but I do hope, with the help of Senator Sears and others who are committed to these issues, including Secretary of State Jim Condos, that we can make more progress on that arena in the next legislative session. Just in terms of the frustrations, I guess is the way to put it, that I found surprising as a new governor vis-a-vis transparency, one of the big challenges has been, and I've been pretty candid about this, changing the culture within state government. And I know that you face that every single day when you try to get information that you need. But in many ways, it isn't so much what's on the statute, what's in the green books, that matters. But we have an equal challenge with changing the culture with the folks that deliver the service of state government. And it's fine for me to stand up as governor and say, we want to have the most transparent administration in the history of this great state. I got to tell you, it is more difficult to get the message all the way down the line so that we get the results we want. And it's been a frustration, and we're going to keep working on it. The first thing that I asked my counsel, Beth Robinson, to do when we brought her on was to go out and meet with every single lawyer in state government for every single agency and let them know how passionately they felt about this, what the law was, what the law doesn't say, and how we can be more transparent. And we made some progress there. Sarah London continues on that crusade. When we get public records requests, it was interesting, we got one recently from some NGA or PGA, I can't remember which related business that I've been involved with, and information out so quickly. They didn't say, why do you do that? No one else does that. You know, why are you letting this information out? Why don't you make it hard for me? So all I can tell you is it is a challenge, both in terms of the green books and in terms of changing the culture of government, but we're going to continue to work together to get it done. I think it's good in a case, as you've seen recently, may have been the Vermont State Police incident up at Burlington. You know, that's an example where I felt very strongly that it is critically important that the facts be known right away. And I think we'll continue to work together to make sure that we have transparent government in Vermont. I want to say a few words about the bigger picture of where we're going. You know, you're reporting at a time and doing it very ably. I feel blessed to have the Vermont press corps, I got to tell you. But we're doing it at a time when a lot of people are pretty cynical about government, when government seems to be failing more and more people, where Congress seems less and less capable of doing anything, whether we agree with it or not, just do something. And where government seems to be failing the really big challenges that voters are facing, just not addressing. And I just want to make this pitch here, that you might be reporting in a state, a time in history where things are happening in Vermont that are not happening anywhere else in America. And I'll just point a few of them out. As you know, I was elected governor at a time when Vermonters on average are making the same money they were making a decade ago, and where we've had huge challenges financially with unemployment, with people feeling like all of a sudden the ground shifted under them. Not because of anything they did, but because of what happened on Wall Street and lots of other places. And suddenly they were living paycheck to paycheck or with no paycheck at all. I'm proud that we've moved Vermont's unemployment rate from a peak of 8.2% at the peak of the recession down to 4.6% last week. And when we go out and talk to businesses, which I do almost constantly, suddenly the conversation has shifted from governor, I think we might delay some more off, which was I was getting 18 months ago, to governor, we're concerned we can't find enough employees trained through the jobs that we have available to get the product out the door. That's a huge shift. But the programs that we are working on to try to address the real problems that Vermonters are facing, I would argue aren't happening anywhere else. I am bound and determined, despite what the U.S. Supreme Court does, to deliver the first single-payer healthcare system in America, where healthcare is a right and not a privilege, where it follows the individual, isn't required by the employer, and where we spend money on healthcare, making people healthier instead of waste, insurance company profits, and a fee-for-service system that will bankrupt us. You're going to hear a lot about in the coming months. The unknowns, how frightening this is, how scary it is, how we don't know exactly what the Green Mountain Healthcare Board is designing. We want the answers now, and if we don't get them, that's not fair, and it's scary that we don't know what's going on, and it's scaring business and others away. You're going to see a lot of big interest coming from the insurance companies and others who want to ensure that we fail. Not because they really care about the little state of Vermont, but they know if the pony gets out of the shed in the state of Vermont, the stallion could get out of the shed in California and New York and other big states where governors say to me, wow, we want to know more about what you're doing there because it looks really interesting. The challenge is simple. If we fail on this mission of delivering single-payer health care in Vermont, I said that we will stunt job growth, we will bankrupt the middle class, and we will drive more jobs out of Vermont. Why? Because we have the same challenges in every single business and every single middle-class family. More and more Vermonters paying more and more money to insurance companies for less and less coverage, asking both employees and individuals to pay more and more out of their pocket for less and less security. This is a crisis. If we continue to spend what we're spending on healthcare in this little state, if we just spend what we spend over the last 10 years, that rate of growth, for the next 3 years, we will be spending $2,500 out of the pockets of every single living Vermonter on health care that we're not spending today on health care every single year in a state where Vermonters are making the same money they were making a decade ago. I ask you this. If as governor, I wasn't trying to ambitiously choke the rate of growth, deliver quality care, and solve this problem, you should fire me. I am not scared about the unknown, as the critics will tell you. I am frightened to death about what I know. And the difference in Vermont is this simple. You got a governor who's willing to take what we know and say, if we don't change the way we're doing business with healthcare, we know that we will bankrupt Vermonters. This is a big one. This is a really big one. Second, on energy. Listen, you've been here with me. You've seen what we've dealt with. The biggest blizzard in Vermont history last February ever recorded. This is a snow state, for God's sake. The storms of April, the storms of May, Irene in August. The point is, climate change is our biggest challenge, period. If we don't get off of oil, find other ways to power Vermont, we will not leave this state livable for future generations. That's kind of a big one, team. I don't believe there's very many people in this room, and I can point them out. You know, you've got a few young reporters, but there aren't there very many people in this room who grew up with the reality that the choices that we make as a society about energy will determine whether or not your grandkids have a livable planet. I didn't have that reality growing up in Putney, Vermont as a kid. If someone had said to me, whether you put fuel in your car or have a plug, whether you power your electricity with coal or oil or wind or solar or biomass or small hydro will determine whether or not your grandkids will have a livable future, whether you can grow crops in Vermont, whether we have a bright future. I would have said, come on, you're crazy. That's the reality folks are living with. So moving to renewables, what's happening in Vermont, energy efficiency, leading the way, this is huge stuff. It is going to make history. If Vermont can lead, others will follow. There is a reason that the Department of Labor Statistics said 4 weeks ago, Vermont has more jobs, green jobs, per capita than any other state in the country. There's a reason for that. It's the choices we're making in public policy in Vermont, partnering with businesses to power renewables, a huge, I say, shift going on in this state. It's going to be a leader, not a follower. And third, telecom. Listen, you know, depending on where you're reporting from, that we are behind Bosnia, we're behind Croatia, we're behind Vietnam, we're behind Cambodia, we're behind the other 49 states on connectivity. My house still is on a copper wire with Fairpoint. And when my daughters try to communicate the way they do when they're not at home, they get very frustrated. The point is, we're going to deliver on the promise of connecting Vermont to high-speed internet access by 2013. The partnership that we have in Vermont is unusual. It is no different than the challenge that the best governor of Kentucky, George D. had when he needed to connect rural Vermont to electricity in the 1930s. We're delivering on that promise. And finally, recidivism. I say the things that we're doing to get our nonviolent offenders who are mostly addicted to drugs and alcohol, many of whom have difficulty reading, to break the revolving door back into prison when their time is up at $54,000 a year, taxpayer money all out of Vermonters' pockets, to go to prison, or have the services on the ground to help them recover, is a huge and ambitious undertaking that is going to help us make this again. So those are a few of the things and reasons why I envy you getting paid too little to report too much in the state of Vermont. You're doing a great job of it, and keep it up. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Congratulations to all the awardees today. I hope you all win awards. And I got to say, as your governor, I'm proud to have you as a press corps. You do it better than anyone else. So thank you. Fire it up. have been lucky enough to be elected to lead. As you know, a lot of the open meeting law is municipal government. I personally think there's a lot of things we can do to improve municipal government's transparency. I'll give you examples. I think it's crazy that executive sessions don't, once the executive session basis is completed, don't report on what was said, what transpired, what went down. What's the point of having transparency if you don't in the end find out what business was done? I understand if you've been on a select board, the sensitivity sometimes in personnel issues and others, to not letting those details out at that moment. But there's no reason why it's been resolved, like other states, why it couldn't be made public. I think 72 hours for warnings of the agenda makes sense so that people can get there and know what's going to be discussed. There are a lot of things we can do in terms of that bill. And we'll continue to work to drag it past. I was disappointed it didn't come.
We had a story this week that the Hardwick Electric Department has a parcel of land in Greensboro, and the state tax department, especially in the town of Greensboro, started taxing the light department for that parcel, and it's been tax exempt for almost 18 years. And so we were having a discussion in the newsroom about it, and there was a comment made by a town official that, well, this was probably being pushed by Act 60. My thought was, you've got a general fund budget, you've got the education budget, transportation budget, whatever. If the tax department is leaning on municipals, utilities, as well as municipalities, to start taxing more, that's shifting the tax burden to the property tax. And so I guess my question is, why don't you deal with the income tax and broad-based taxes to fund more of the needs in the general budget, rather than shifting it back to the local level of property tax? And then you can stand there and say, well, we're not raising taxes, but in fact you are. You're raising them on the local level when you push to the property tax.
Well, I'm not familiar with the particular piece you're talking about, to be honest, but I can talk to the bigger issue, which is I've always, I've been a firm supporter of Act 60 and 68. It's good law. Despite what the critics say about it, we are the only state in the country that takes the most regressive tax, which is a property tax, in a democratic society's most important mission, which is educating our children, and basically turns it into an income tax. That's what it does. Act 68 says if you own your house and 2 acres for the school portion of your tax, you will pay based on income instead of property wealth. That's a huge accomplishment. People underestimate that. The second piece of Act 68 that's so powerful, written, by the way, by a Hardwick resident in part, is that we're the only state in the country where every kid has equal access to resources, regardless of whether they're born into a property-rich town or a property-poor community. This is big stuff. So I think that we have taken a system that everybody's always going to hate, which is funding schools through property taxes, and turned it into the most progressive that we possibly could turn it into. So we've made lemonade out of lemons more elegantly than every state when it comes to school funding. Having said that, in terms of the income tax, here's the challenge. We're using the income tax to fund education in Vermont. We have the most progressive income tax in America. I actually, as chair of the Finance Committee, helped write that income tax code, and I believe in it. Rich people pay more income taxes in Vermont than middle-class people and poor people by factors that are greater than any other state in the 50 states. That's what the story that isn't told. The fact of the matter is that the middle class in Vermont pays income taxes. This may surprise some of you, but if you go look at the numbers, the middle class in Vermont pays income taxes that are lower than Rhode Island, than New York, than Connecticut, than Massachusetts, than almost all of our New England neighbors. It's just true. So when people say to me, them again. This is pretty simple math. Now, I've said many times, I can do tax policy in Vermont because I'm the first governor in almost 50 years that can see New Hampshire from my house. And I can. And it doesn't look like Russia. So my point is simply this: we're already doing it. Don't believe those who say that Vermont joins the federal government in giving rich people a break, because we don't. Now, I totally agree with you, maybe not all of you, but some of you, that in D.C. we have a huge problem, that rich people have never had it better in America, that the federal tax code is written for those who make a lot of money, and they've never gotten a better deal, and we ought to change it. But that, we can't correct that particular ill from Montpelier. We need Congress to straighten out the mess in the federal tax code that gives the 1% extraordinary low tax rates.
Given what happened to the Wilmington police case, have you taken a position on the attorney general's race?
No. Yes, this is my position. I mean, just say yes. My position is that I am delighted to have two great candidates running as Democrats for attorney general. I'll support whoever wins the nomination.
Have you encouraged Lucy to run for state auditor against Doug Hoffer?
You know, that's an interesting question. As governor, I find something interesting, which is that I have a lot of people from both parties, all parties, I should say, all four parties, often ask my advice about their political aspirations. And I give that advice freely and with great enthusiasm. But I don't share those advice sessions with anyone except for them. So you have to ask Senator Lizzie whether I've said anything.
Governor, should private hospitals that are providing care to state psychiatric patients be subject to the same levels of transparency as the Vermont State Hospital was?
I'd have to know a little bit more about where you're going with that.
Just
I would
generically?
like to see every organization that provides services to the state of Vermont be as transparent as possible. But I do understand this difference between public and private sector. And as an example, when we contract with Pike Industries to pave our roads, I don't expect Pike Industries to be totally transparent about their finances as we would expect a public entity to be. So I guess the answer is frankly no.
Governor, I hope I'm under a misimpression, and I may well be under a misimpression. But my impression, miss or not, is that perhaps you're not being wholly transparent about your plans for health care in all of its details and refinement. Could you help me out on this one?
Sure. We are being transparent, and we're being absolutely transparent about everything that we know. And the accusation has been made that we somehow have, that we wish not to be transparent till after the election about how we're going to pay for a single-payer healthcare system in Vermont. The truth is, we don't know. And we don't know because we have not yet designed a delivery system. The Green Mountain Healthcare Board is working on that every single day, that we can figure out how much it's going to cost. What I've said very clearly is, if it doesn't cost less, considerably less, than what we otherwise would have paid under the current system, we're not going to go ahead. The challenge is not to figure out how to pay for it, because we're paying for it right now. The challenge is to design the first delivery system in America that moves from fee-for-service, where you get reimbursed for the number of services you do to someone, to a system that reimburses providers for keeping you healthy. Preventative care, good diet, exercise, eating Vermont food instead of corporate food, all the things we know we should be doing to stay healthy. So all I can tell you is Green Mountain Healthcare Board working as fast as they can to design a delivery system that we envision. We've been totally transparent about that. The minute that we have some indication of what that system will cost, we will be absolutely transparent about how to pay for it. We are right now engaging consultants that have more knowledge than most people in Vermont, we hope, about how best to pay for it. But there is nothing that we're not being transparent about in healthcare. I want to warn you that the critics of healthcare, the folks who are making so much money on the system, insurance companies, medical parts makers, knees and hips, pharmaceutical industry, the folks that are making so much money in the system want you to believe that there are evil things happening in Vermont. And they're going to spend a lot of money to convince you that that is true. All I ask is, when someone says they're not being transparent, I would ask you to say to them, how, what, why, in what way? Because we are telling you everything we know and a lot that we don't know. Yep.
A little while back, you said that you would support making public results of investigations in the police. Is that something you're going to push for in the next legislative session?
Well, first I want to point out that I have been pushing for it as governor. And, as I said, it takes time to sometimes change the mechanics of government. But the answer is yes. We're going to work together with legislative leaders to look at the areas that we feel we could make real progress and try to get a bill through the legislature to help.
And that's one of the areas that people...
I want to look at, my view is, and I think Maria said at the opening, we've got these 264 exemptions or whatever it is, and our first notion was, let's go through them exemption by exemption and figure out which makes sense and which don't. And I think anyone who's been part of that process, many of you from the press, would say, wow, that's a laborious, long, tedious exercise. So my suggestion is that instead you pick sectors of government and really focus on transparency in those sectors. It seems to me that judiciary, law enforcement is the place to start. Okay, I'll take one more. So that just means Sue's getting nervous. You know Sue. She gets nervous. I've said too much. Is that true, Sue?
How many Vermont strong license plates have you sold?
Wow. I can't count that high. So ask Rob, my commissioner, because I'm staying away from numbers from now on.
Your views on the CVES and Green Mountain Power merger are well known. I'm curious about reports that Green Mountain Power will be seeking a compressed process to determine electricity rates, which in fact excludes the public and more public input into the process. That seems to run contradictory to transparency.
Well, let me just start by saying, I don't control that. I mean, this is an issue for the Public Service Board. It's a quasi-judicial board. I have huge confidence in them. We've got a great board. And one of the issues that I had with the last discussion was that we had legislators threatening to dictate to the Public Service Board in a pending case how to do their business. So I will stay out of that issue. I have confidence the Public Service Board will make the right judgments, or maybe they'll make the wrong judgments, I don't know, but I'm going to stay out of that for sure. I'm not sure that when we go to the CV Green Mountain Power merger issue that my views are all as well understood as you suggested based on what I've read in the press, but I'll go with you on that one.
Well, then enlighten us.
Sure. Let's back up for a minute. You're not going to find a governor, I don't think, in the history of this state, with the exception of maybe the last governor from Putney, George D. Aiken, who has been as hard on the utilities over the years as this one. I begged Howard Dean, when he was governor, to buy the dams on the Connecticut River. I brought in Matt Rubin, I brought in a bunch of folks who are involved in Energy Today, 40 of us. We begged him to look at having the public ownership of those dams. I think it would be great for Vermont's energy policy. Some years later, when I was not in politics, Senator Luzzi led the same crusade and failed with a different governor. I have been a real critic, as some of the folks here will tell you, of a number of huge utility proposals, including Velco power lines and expansions that I thought were short-sighted and too expensive. And the list goes on and on. So all I can tell you is this sort of, I read in the press that because I asked Mary Powell to co-chair my inaugurational party that sent $84,000 to the families of National Guard members who were having their families fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, because I asked her to co-chair that, but somehow I'm now in the pockets of the utilities, is a stretch that seems unimaginable to this boy from Putney. Second, on the CV merger, what I've always said is, philosophically, I'm a big believer in Vermont companies being owned by Vermont companies. And, you know, I helped Ben and Jerry's when Unilever wanted to take them over when I was in the Senate, try to pass, we passed it too late, legislation that would help them fight off a hostile takeover. And my preference is always that Vermont companies remain Vermont companies, don't get bought out by anyone, period. So when this merger came along, there were two buyers. CV decided to sell one weekend, exactly a year ago, actually, Labor Day. And over the weekend, the stockholders picked up $150 million from when they went to bed on Thursday night to when they woke up on Tuesday morning after that holiday. And my comment was right away, hey, you know, the stockholders are going to do just fine. No one needs to defend them. My job as governor is to get the best deal possible for the ratepayers and the taxpayers that I can possibly get out of their decision to sell the company. Now, there's a lot of criticism that we're selling out to a Canadian company. They were going to be owned by Canadians. I just want to refresh the record here. There were two buyers. Two buyers. One was from Canada, and the other was from Canada. So I can't control that both buyers are from Canada. It is a free market world. I'm not God, I'm governor. So the point is, we know who the buyers were. So I sat down with the CEO, and I sat down with both of them, both buyers, and I grilled them with Liz Miller, the best commissioner I believe that this department's ever had. And I said to the guys from Newfoundland, hey, your stockholders did great over the weekend, but what are you going to do for the people who elected me? And you know what this guy said? He said, what do you mean? I can't remember his name anymore. And I said, I'm worried about the ratepayers. What are you going to do for the ratepayers? He said, Governor, direct quote, rates don't matter. You're looking at the wrong thing. All you should worry about is reliability. I nearly fell out of my chair. So I asked the question a different way, and I got the same answer. And I concluded in that meeting that that crew from Newfoundland was not as good a future for Vermont's taxpayers and ratepayers as the crew from Quebec. So I made the determination there we had a better deal, and I was honest with you about it. Most governors wouldn't have been. They would have been, I got to stay out of this, I'm going to make enemies, blah, blah, blah. Then we instructed and worked together with our team at the Public Service Board to cut the best deal we could for ratepayers with Gas Metro. And Liz did. You try to negotiate with these guys. She got the best deal for ratepayers because it was the $144 million of savings in the first 10 years and the $500 million savings in the next 20 were geared so that the stockholders got all the savings in the beginning, big surprise I'm sure to people in this room, and the ratepayers got the savings for the last 3 years. Liz Miller, by working very hard, negotiated a deal where the ratepayers got the money up front too. So we negotiated the best deal we could. We sent it down to the Public Service Board. If you ask any of the utilities, they'll tell you that we beat on them as hard as they've seen any department beat on them in a negotiation. And we got results. We got results. So all I can tell you is this notion that, you know, I'm cuddly with the utilities, I believe is not only historically untrue, but currently untrue. Yeah, Sue's getting really I'm looking forward to it, yes. The only thing I got to tell you is I remember when Governor Cuno was governor, and I remember reading his clip one time, and she said, oh, it's terrible. She said, I never had time to read anymore. And I got to tell you, I get it. I mean, the one thing about this job that surprised me, and I guess it was in the paper again today or everybody, as you know, born and raised in Vermont, had some success building businesses. It didn't happen easily. I'm used to working hard. I got no problem with 7 days a week. All I can tell you is I've never been busier in my life to try to deliver on promises that I've made. And I haven't read a book in a long time. And I probably won't start with that one. That's not any criticism, it's just true. Yeah.
OxyContin and such opiates.
Yeah.
It seems to me, and I may be wrong on this, but it's talking with law enforcement people and talking with people in education, pharmaceutical industry, and more specifically, the physicians, if not a free ride, pretty close to it.
Yep.
Is something going to happen there so the medical profession finally start taking ownership of this issue?
Well, listen, I'm so glad to close on that question. Because one of my big disappointments of the session was that we didn't get through the piece that your awardee brought me on, which was to give the 4 state police officers in the state of Vermont the tools they need to help us fight this epidemic. And I don't use the word epidemic lightly. I just want to close by telling you this story. I'll never forget when I was president of the Senate on my first tour of duty, and Howard Dean was governor. And he called me in his office one day, in his ceremonial office, and all alone, there was no staff in there. And he was red from the neck up. And when Howard Dean, anyone can remember, when he gets mad, he's red from the neck up, as you can tell he's pissed off. So I go into the office, and he's red. And I'm thinking to myself, I did plenty of things to get him red-faced over the years, but I hadn't done anything that day or that week. So I sit down in a chair and go, I don't know what I did to piss him off this morning. This is going to be a long morning. So I sit there, and he goes, Peter, he goes, we got a crisis, and you got to help me with it. This is so terrible. You've got no idea what's just happened. He said, you ever heard of OxyContin? I go, no. He goes, well, I'm just telling you, the FDA has just approved this thing called OxyContin, and it's legalized heroin. It's going to be the most addictive drug ever invented, and they're going to pass it out in drugstores. And we got to outlaw it in Vermont. I thought, well, you know, I mean, as long as the press isn't here, you're not going to quote me on this. It's like the Reformed Christians, they sometimes get pretty extreme. Howard was a Reformed drinker and whatever else, and he ate all this, and I left. I never thought another word about it. I just let the blood pressure go down, sewer something, and take care of it for the rest of the day. So I go back to work. You know, and 10 years later, 10 years to the day, I'm running for governor. I'm down in the House chamber. Senator Patrick Leahy has United States Attorney General Eric Holder in the well of the House. You can't get a seat. Law enforcement sitting on each other's laps to talk about the OxyContin challenge in Vermont, what the hell we're going to do about it. 10 years later, after the red-faced North Howard Dean said, we got to act. So, you know, that's where we are. Now, I defy anyone in this room to tell me, raise your hand if you don't have a family member, a neighbor, a friend or an acquaintance who has gotten addicted to FDA-approved opiates. Not very many of us can put a hand up. And if we can, there aren't too many of us who can raise a hand who can say, we don't know someone who's gotten their car, their house, or their business ripped off by someone trying to get $80 to buy another pill on the street. So we have a huge challenge. Vermont shares with the state of Maine more people in opiate addiction and alcohol addiction than any other state per capita in the country. We need the tools to help fight this crisis. One of the many was this. All we said was this. Not what the press has been writing, that we were giving law enforcement access to the database that doctors now have that records what docs passes out to whom and how much. That's not what our bill said. What our compromise said was Harry Chen, the Commissioner of Health, a doctor who has that information, would have the authority, if you got a tip from a pharmacy or from law enforcement or some doctor, to be able to say, Pete Shumlin picked up the following class of drugs in the following 5 pharmacies over the last few days or weeks. Not my medical records, no access to my medical records, just send you the names of the pharmacies. And right now what happens is, law enforcement, without a subpoena, best kept secret of the session, can go into any pharmacy in Vermont and get your prescribing records right now. Go right down here to any of these people, Walgreens or wherever the hell they want to go. All this said is we're going to give access, not access to the database, but the information sent to law enforcement, so that instead of having to shop among the hundreds and hundreds of pharmacies in the state to see what piece someone's been ripping off, you can actually give them the names of the pharmacies I've been accessing to abuse my hand. So really disappointed that didn't pass. I say to, my mom was a founding board member of the ACLU. I'm a big believer in open government. But this is not a privacy issue. This is a tool that's needed that gives you less access than you currently have law enforcement. Barney from the Sheriff's Department right now can walk in and get your prescribing records without a warrant. The fact that we couldn't get this passed, the Senate was right, the House was dead wrong. We're going to get it passed next year. We need more tools in our tool chest to fight this problem. Thanks so much for having me.